Hi, I'm Wes Allen with DM Tales, and today I am reviewing a game that is basically Stranger Things, the tabletop role-playing game. This is Kids on Bikes. Let's roll it. Now, Kids on Bikes comes in at 74 pages, although there is a character sheet at the end with some thanks on the back, so it really could be considered 76 pages. It is a soft cover binding and a perfect bound, so it's not going to be too durable, but it's such a compact book that I don't see it falling apart anytime soon. The paper that they used for the book is glossy, which really makes the artwork shine, which is one of the cool parts of this book, and I'll get to that in a minute. It does, however, make the glare off the text sometimes difficult to read just for me. This is kind of be for people who have a hard time filtering through it, and I'm one of those people, unfortunately. So something to keep in mind if you get the book. You might want to pick up the PDF if glare on glossy paper really kind of gives you a headache. While the game is 74 pages total, from 56 on, which is over a quarter of the book, it's all appendices. And in these appendices are things like guides for party creation as you're trying to determine how your characters are related to one another, strengths and weaknesses charts, and the ways that you create powered characters, which we'll get to also in a bit. At the end of these appendices, you have different tropes, which is essentially what Kids on Bikes uses for character classes. There's no class structure per se, but you pick up these tropes and they have different strengths and weaknesses and different abilities, and that's kind of what takes the place of it. The last two appendix are for your difficulty challenge, how to set them for the characters to accomplish a task in-game, and a role results table that gives you some narrative frameworks depending on how well you succeed or how badly you fail. As I said, and you can see it on the cover, the artwork of this book is absolutely gorgeous. It has an old school 1950s, 1960s comic book feel vibe, along with all the little dithering dots that people would use back then to do colors. And the way that the colors and the lines are drawn almost gives this feel of an Art Deco vibe. So it's blending two different styles. It is just stunning. I love paging through the book and seeing the different drawings that are in there. The art is done by a person named Heather Vaughan, and I'm putting her gallery in the description below because her stuff is really worth checking out. And I discovered as I was preparing my review of this book that she's Philly-based, which also makes me very pleased. I love that this type of work is being done in Philadelphia. It's just amazing. The game design is really interesting. There are 6 different stats. They are brains, which is your ability to solve kind of mental puzzles. Brawn, which is your ability to use brute force, not for fighting. That's actually your fight attribute. Flight, which is your ability to kind of squeeze through or get away from different things. Charm, so little kids can put on the charm and make adult hearts melt. And then grit, which is your kind of mental resolve in the game. They function really neat. And one of the cool things about Kids and Bikes is that your stats are not rolled. Instead, you take one of the 6 polyhedral dice and you assign them to that ability score. And the heavier die or the larger sided die that you're using for that attribute, the better. The more skilled you are at that particular attribute. So if you're really strong on brawn and you have a 20 there, you could be not too bright and put a 4 there because you're trying to play kind of the jock type character. And it really informs the way that you're going to use your character. It's really going to impact the types of actions that you take. It's not just that you don't have a bonus here, it's that your particular challenge you need to hit is far above what your max die roll can be on the surface. That's a really interesting way of doing things, and to me, that's one of the really cool aspects of Kids on Bikes is the way that it handles your stats. The mechanics of using different attribute checks are very simple. A player decides on a course of action that they are going to take, and you as a GM and the player as the player decide which attribute is going to apply to that. And you roll to see if you're going to accomplish the task. There's basically a challenge rating system on this to where if you assign something to be a 20 to succeed, it is basically an impossible task, like lifting a car off somebody in order to free them. Whereas you get all the way down to a 1 or 2 and it's an almost automatic, like I get up to sharpen my pencil. This is kind of interesting because if you have a die assigned to an attribute that literally can't get to the required number to succeed in that task, well then how do you do it? Is a quote unquote dumb jock ever going to try to solve a puzzle that really takes brains? And the answer is yes, because in Kids on Bikes, there is a dice exploding mechanic. And this is fun for me because it's the first game I've ever looked at that had exploding dice. Essentially, what happens is if you roll your die for your attribute and it is the highest value on that die, the dice explodes, which means you get to roll it again and you add that number to your initial roll. And rolls are adjusted depending on whether or not they are a planned action or a snap decision. So if your party's all sitting together and they're going, we need to really sit down and figure this out, then you're going to roll according to those rules. And if you're in the midst of like a stressful situation where you're running away and you get to a locked door and you have to put in a combination that you need to try to remember, that's a snap decision. So you're going to have penalties for that because your stress is really heightened at that point. I love the way that they kind of differentiate between the two, and it really works as I'm looking at the mechanics of the game. So when an ability check is made, depending on how high above or how far below someone is on the number that you need to succeed, is going to determine just how good the success is or just how disastrous the failure is. And it's a really nice way of doing things, as you might suspect, because in Kids on Bikes, you are literally kids on bikes, or they're connected adults who are just living in an ordinary town. Combat is not a huge factor in this game. Combat can happen. There are rules for it, but essentially it uses the same basic mechanics as a normal ability check. You take the attacker's fight versus the defender's brawn, and the brawn becomes the challenge rating to succeed or fail. And similar to how a regular ability check works, the higher you are above your number to succeed or the lower you are below the number that you need to succeed is going to adjust how the narrative works. Higher successes are much better outcomes. More negative failures are much more disastrous outcomes. One of the cool things about Kids on Bikes is that the player gets to narrate how that failure or that success works. So for players who really want to be much more involved in the narrative telling of the game, this is the style of play that you probably want. Where the game kind of falls short, however, is in its design. As much as I love the mechanics of it, the overall design seems to be a little bit more convoluted than it needs to be. It is designed to be collaborative, but almost to a fault. This comes out when you're trying to create your characters, because the way the game is set up, you don't just create your character and throw them into the situation. You actually have to sit down with the other party members and answer and ask questions of one another. This determines the relationships between the people at the table who are playing this party. And it really is interesting, but for folks who are kind of new to the role playing, I just find it would be a little bit daunting to be put on the spot like that. I think perhaps the most obvious way that total collaborative feel to the game is on display is in the way that a so-called powered character works. This is essentially Kids on Bikes' version of 11 from Stranger Things. The parties get together and they create that character together. And then instead of having the GM or the referee power the character, the way the rules are written is each player gets to control a different aspect of that powered character's actions. It just seems to be, to me, more complex than it needs to be. When the powered character is faced with a challenge, it can be solved in multiple ways. Is the party going to fight over which aspect of that character is going to be used in order to solve that dilemma? That's the type of thing that I don't think it's needed in the game. And there are optional rules to let the GM or a particular player play the powered character so that that type of thing is taken out. But if you're going to do that because you're worried that it might disrupt the table, just let the GM run the character. As I said, the book is short, but it really could be shorter. I pointed out that over a quarter of the book is appendices. There's a lot of things that are reiterated in the book, and that's why these appendices kind of exist. And for something that is this short, the book itself should function almost as a quick reference in and of its own right. There shouldn't be the need for all of these appendices at the end. It's only 74 pages long. Some of these charts should just be where the rules are described in the book and left there. They don't need to be reiterated again. The other thing that I find difficult when I was reading through the book is that there are so many examples, literally for every different aspect of the game, there is a call out text where there's just an example of play. My struggle with it is not so much that these exist, but that oftentimes they take a rule that I might have had trouble digesting already, that's beyond just the simple mechanics, and made it less clear in the way that the rules are written. There's too many, well, this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen, or this could happen. I understand that there's a need for example play. I mean, this has been around since Dungeons and Dragons, but to lean so heavily on them just makes me wonder if the authors really had trust. They had written the rules clearly enough to be understood. I'm not getting the feeling that they trusted in that as they were going through the process of creating the game. So to me, just the design philosophy of the way the book is laid out and presented leaves a little bit to be desired. Now, you might think that I am not glad that I bought this book. This is not the case. I'm very glad that I bought this book. It is very cool, and it promotes a narrative-centric game, which is something that I know is very popular, and it's something that I'd like to give a try at some point. Here's the thing. If you are someone who is connected to a theater group, or if you're teaching a drama class in college or high school, you literally could grab this book and teach a unit on improv just from the character creation aspect alone. You wouldn't even need to actually play a scenario at that point, because so much of what goes on in that party and setting creation really echoes of the types of exercises that you see on a show like Whose Line Is It Anyway? In that respect, this game is perfect for people who are dedicated to that craft of acting, because this is going to help them develop the very improv skills they're going to need in order to be a decent actor, which is really kind of cool. And it would be fun for folks that want a game that is role-playing centric to the extreme. They're not totally into just moving figures around on a grid. They want to be able to have those conversations and do 3-hour-long shopping trips. And that's not boring for them. This is a game that really is catered to them, because you're not high adventurers in Kids on Bikes. You're kids on bikes. You're riding your bike around town and you're trying to uncover the mystery of the black helicopters flying overhead. And it's all going to be that style of role-playing. So if this is the type of game that you're looking for, really, that's it. You can buy Kids on Bikes perhaps at your local hobby shop, or you can go to renegadestudios.com and find it there for $25 in print. It is also on sale at DriveThruRPG for $9.99 as a PDF. No, not too expensive, and it's worth kind of checking out. So next week, I think I'm going to be looking at a new favorite module for Foundry VTT. Until then, happy playing, everyone.